Howdy, I'm Scott Apel, saloon hall critic for the Columbia Gazette. Living in Harmony is an unusual episode of The Prisoner, but it does bear some similarities to an earlier episode, the A, B, and C. Remember, it's never been the goal of number one to break the prisoner. It's always been the plan to win him over to the side of the village. In both A, B, and C and Living in Harmony, they pump him full of drugs to invade the private domain of his unconscious, first in his dreams, and now in the hallucinogenic fantasy they force him to believe in. But neither trickery nor blackmail can make our hero compromise his ideals, or his mind. In both cases, number two and his accomplices are themselves caught up in their own fantasy and are overwhelmed by the strength of the prisoner's will. We've been mentioning for weeks the timeless nature of the themes of this series. If you had any doubts about the truth of this, Living in Harmony should settle them once and for all. Within the context of the series, this episode shows us that the prisoner's battle for personal freedom could just as easily have taken place 100 years ago as the 20 years ago when this episode was filmed. In a larger sense, the prisoner's theme of the individual versus society is the stuff that great literature has been made of for literally thousands of years. And so we thought we'd recommend a short selection of lasting classics which supplement and expand upon this idea in ways which only literature can. Although this is in no way intended to be a definitive list, these books do shed some light on the various themes of the prisoner. Brave New World by Aldous Huxley and 1984 by George Orwell. Both show a grim picture of the world as the village. Animal Farm, also by Orwell, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest by Ken Kesey, and A Clockwork Orange by Anthony Burgess, all brilliant allegories of society's manipulation of its members who dare to be different. The Prince by Machiavelli, a rule book for aspiring number twos. The Trial by Franz Kafka. Many elements of Kafka can be found in this series, not the least of which is the faceless menace of society's persecution of the individual. Modern science fiction abounds in stories of this sort. We can certainly recommend Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury, as well as many of the works of Philip K. Dick, who questioned reality constantly, most notably in his book The Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch. And if you're interested in digging deeper into the series as mythology, try Carl Jung's essay in Man and His Symbols, or Joseph Campbell's books The Hero with a Thousand Faces and Myths to Live By. And as long as we're on the subject of literature, we shouldn't overlook the master of English literature, William Shakespeare, who pretty accurately summed up the heart of the prisoner's message in one line from Richard III. "I've been studying to compare this prison which I live unto the world." With all this in mind, we could easily see our hero as a rogue knight, storming away from the Round Table and trapped in Chapel Perilous by some evil wizard, or as a 17th century samurai warrior, or even perhaps as a Han Solo type, fighting some far future evil empire. So why a Western? Well, a Western is the best known modern myth, and it does bring the themes into a little closer focus. Westerns are full of open confrontations, for instance, as opposed to the secretive manipulations of the modern spy's world. But it could go deeper. The Old West was a place of freedom for independent people. They opened up the frontier with only their ideals and their wits to guide them. But in the wake of these trailblazers followed people like the judge, bound and determined to impose society's laws and morals on people like the prisoner. So perhaps Living in Harmony is trying to tell us that the prisoner's battle isn't with the idea of society, but rather with the abuse of society, whether it's by those who abuse power or by those who will blindly obey such abuse. But before we get involved in overanalyzing, we should keep in mind McGowan's motive for this particular episode. "I always wanted to do a Western," he said. And in doing Living in Harmony, he can claim the distinction of creating the first Western ever filmed in England. Harmony was one of the filler episodes shot to expand the prisoner's intended first season of 13 episodes to 17 for sale to American television. As with Do Not Forsake Me and The Girl Who Was Death, McGowan and his partner, David Tomblin, had to come up with a storyline that didn't need the village, Portmeirion, as a background. We might also mention that Living in Harmony was the one episode of The Prisoner never broadcast on American network TV. CBS only had a 16-week slot into which to put the 17-episode series, and Harmony was the old maid in their shuffling. Another bit of trivia concerns the kid, Alexis Canner. Apparently, McGowan and he are close friends, and McGowan starred in a film Canner wrote, produced, and directed entitled Kings and Desperate Men. To the best of our knowledge, this film has never been released in the United States, but watch for Canner to reappear in the final episode of The Prisoner in a pivotal role. Well, kids, it's about time for these boot heels to be moseying on. I'd just like to leave you with one thought which seems appropriate for this episode, Living in Harmony. That is the motto of the Texas Rangers. Little man whip a big man every time, if little man's in the right and keeps it coming. Be seeing you.
Quadruple.
Parthenogenesis.
And then from the shoulder.